America's Secret Destiny, presenting the evidence that America was set upon a secret course by this nation's founding fathers. A presentation of Publius Productions, delivered on December the 28th, 2009. Part 1 of 4. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I will be the one presenting this material. Let me explain first that this is a PowerPoint presentation computer program, and it will not allow me to change slides while I am speaking. So this might sound a little disjointed, and there will be short gaps while I am changing slides. I want you to also know that I am granting you permission to make copies of all parts of this DVD, and if you agree with me, may I suggest that you make copies and give them to everyone that you think might watch them so that others may learn the truth about America's future. I would like to start with a remembrance of a fine young man I met named Willie Solis. I first met him in 1983 and was instantly impressed with his opposition to the evils of communism. He was a Costa Rican who was photographed as he burned a flag in his town square. But the flag he burned was not the American flag, but the Russian flag. This was right after the world thought that the Russians had shot down the Korean Airlines flight number 007 carrying 268 civilians and American Congressman Larry McDonald. So Willie decided to show his contempt for Russia's actions by publicly burning their flag. That act certainly did not endear him to the communists in Costa Rica. I dedicated my second book to Willie with these words. I dedicate this book to Willie Solis, a freedom fighter from Costa Rica, who loved freedom so much that he was willing to pay the ultimate price for it. And he did. He was murdered by the communists. Willie Solis, 1962 to 1984, we miss you. By the way, for your information, that plane was not shot down by a Russian missile. The plane landed and the passengers and the congressman were taken captive. Our government lied to us. And I will provide more details about that episode in my DVD entitled Only the U.S. Has Nukes. I'm going to speak about America's Secret Destiny, something I first discovered in 1985 when I started studying the symbols on the back of our dollar bill. I would dare say that this speech will not be very pleasant to hear, because what I have found is very disturbing, because I have uncovered the evidence that our founding fathers were not great and noble men as we have been taught. And when I first found this, I questioned my research because I had a great deal of difficulty in accepting this premise. And I believe that you will question it as well. Therefore, I would like to ask each of you to serve on a jury. That means I'm asking you to be open and listen to all the evidence I will present before you reach a verdict. That is all I can ask, so if you will do that, I will say that this speech will be one of the most important you will ever hear. I wrote a booklet entitled America's Secret Destiny in 1995, based upon 34 years of research. And in that booklet I discussed the evidence that I had found that our founding fathers dedicated this nation to a secret destiny in at least 1782 in a thing that they called the New World Order. That was the theme of a comment made by Henry Kissinger, America's Secretary of State, during the presidency of Richard Nixon. He was quoted as saying that America is uniquely endowed to play a creative and decisive role in the new order which is taking form around us. So Mr. Kissinger was saying that America would lead the world into this thing called the New World Order, and he said this in 1975. And according to the Birmingham News, it wasn't until the night of September the 11th, 1990, that President George Bush the father addressed the nation and claimed that the Gulf War had forged a new world order. He said something to the effect that the Persian Gulf crisis would lead to a new world order, but he failed to explain what he meant by those words. By the way, notice that this speech was delivered on September the 11th, the date of the World Trade Center attack on 9/11. I'm certain it is just another coincidence. All of the signs that I was reading during those years indicated that the New World Order desired by this nation's founding fathers and President George Bush was scheduled to start on January the 1st, 2000. But this obviously did not occur. However, that does not mean that my research was incorrect. It means that another date has been selected and that this date has truly been kept secret from legitimate researchers such as myself. It is possible that the publishing of this booklet back in 1995 and others of my books and videos convinced the conspirators to spend their target date, because the New World Order did not start on January the 1st, 2000. And even today, in 2009, I do not know why they did not do what they had promised. I started exposing the New World Order in 1985 when I toured America on a 91-city, 31-state speaking tour with my first book, entitled The Unseen Hand. The title of my speech was Secret Societies and the New World Order. Notice that this was in 1985, 5 years before George Bush mentioned the phrase in 1990. There is absolutely no way that I can prove that any of my work caused them to change their plans, but my critics cannot prove that it did not either. So you will have to decide for yourself. However, I do know that in the past, this conspiracy has altered their plans because they had been made public by some legitimate historians who found them. Let me impress upon you that these people are committed to achieving their goal, and the New World Order will occur, but at a later date. And let me add that I believe that date is very near. I first started questioning the history I had been taught in school in 1962 after a friend of mine suggested that I start reading what he called revisionist history. I told him that I was unfamiliar with that term, but that I would start reading as he suggested. My friend was introducing me to the view that holds that much of what we have been taught simply is not true, that history needs to be revised. And I had to admit that this was something that I was totally unfamiliar with. I had graduated from the University of Arizona after investing 4 years of my life in, quote, being educated, end quote. And I had to admit that I had not even been introduced to a thought that history needed to be revised. For the first time in my life, I started questioning what I had been taught. 46 years of research since then has convinced me that my friend was right. History needs to be revised. But I could not find the one book that explained the revised American history, so in 1985 I wrote the book myself. The Unseen Hand is 488 pages long and is still being purchased. It is considered by many to be the finest examination of the conspiratorial view of history ever written, and has been praised by PhDs and high school students. May I suggest that you search The Unseen Hand at Amazon.com and read 46 4- and 5-star reviews out of a total of 50 of that book. And then you can decide for yourself whether you wish to read it. But not everyone agrees. A few years ago, I received a letter from the Food and Drug Administration that I had to put the following label on each copy of this book that I sold. And this is what the label has to say. Warning, may cause dizziness. Well, I believe those who like the book and not the Food and Drug Administration. So what you are about to hear will have to undo all of what you have been taught in the past about those who created this nation known as the United States of America. By the way, this is not a typographical error. The word united in the Declaration of Independence is not capitalized. It might be important now for you to know a little more about my background so that you can know why I believe we have been deceived. I have been a student of history for 46 years, and my research has shown me that there is a massive conspiracy at work in this world. And to show you how they have managed our past, I would like first to let you know a little more about my book called The Unseen Hand, an Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. This book examines the evidence that the major events of the past, the wars, revolutions, and depressions, have been caused intentionally years in advance by an evil conspiracy. I call this view the conspiratorial view of history, and it is definitely not the view held by the majority of the historians today. The more traditional view of history is called the accidental view, and this view holds that the major events of the past have occurred by accident. No one really knows why these events happen, they just do. It might be appropriate at this time to define the word conspiracy. It is defined as two or more people meeting in secret with an evil purpose. And to show you that this conspiracy is real, I would like to discuss the testimony of a former president of the United States, Bill Clinton. I want you to know that this president told us on a live national broadcast in 1992 that there was a conspiracy and that he had been elected president because he was a supporter of it. And to start the discussion, I would like to show you a book that the former president and vice president Al Gore wrote in 1992, entitled Putting People First. And on page 217 of this book, Bill Clinton provided us with the transcript of his acceptance speech he delivered on July the 16th, 1992, when he accepted the nomination of his party as President of the United States. And on page 231, this is what he said. As a teenager, I heard John Kennedy's summons to citizenship. And then, as a student at Georgetown University, I heard that call clarified by a professor I had named Carol Quigley. We have to go back now a few years to the summer of 1963 when Bill Clinton was selected to participate in a thing called Boys Nation, held each year in Washington, D.C. to expose the next year's senior students to life in the political arena. This is a picture of young Bill Clinton shaking the hand of President John Kennedy in the Rose Garden of the White House. This picture had to be taken during the summer of 1963 because, as you know, President Kennedy was assassinated in November of that year. As you know, Bill Clinton was elected President of the United States in 1992. And to acknowledge the defeat of George Bush, Time magazine named Bill Clinton Man of the Year in January of 1993. By the way, please notice what Time did when they placed Bill Clinton's picture in front of the letter M in the word Time. They strategically placed his head in such a way as to show the two lines of the letter M as being horns on top of his head. Were they trying to tell us something? But in truth, Time magazine should have named these two men as Men of the Year, President John Kennedy and Professor Carroll Quigley, the two men who made Bill Clinton President of the United States. Just so you know, I would like to apologize to Time magazine. I took one of their covers and cut out its picture and made this cover myself. I don't want to get sued for claiming they made a cover when they didn't. Let me now discuss how these two men made Bill Clinton President of the United States. According to the October 19, 1992 U.S. News and World Report, Bill Clinton graduated from Hot Springs High School in 1964. He then went to Georgetown University later that year. If he completed his studies in 4 years, he would have graduated in 1968. Let me show you what Dr. Quigley taught young Bill Clinton while he was at Georgetown. Dr. Quigley wrote the book entitled Tragedy and Hope in 1966 when Bill Clinton was a student there. This is a poor quality photocopy of the Georgetown Alumnus magazine for the winter of 1993, meaning 25 years after Bill Clinton graduated. It says that the book entitled Tragedy and Hope was required reading for Dr. Quigley's course. That means that Bill Clinton read this book while he was at Georgetown, and we can now read what Bill read. The inside dust cover says that Dr. Quigley was the professor of history at the Foreign Service School at Georgetown University, and that he formerly taught at Princeton and Harvard. He received his PhD from Harvard as well. So Dr. Quigley is what you would call a liberal establishment professor. Now let's see what Dr. Quigley taught young Bill Clinton. This is taken from page 950 of Tragedy and Hope. There does exist and has existed for a generation, meaning back to around 1920, an international Anglophile network which operates, by the way, the word Anglophile means primarily English. To some extent, in the way the radical right believes the Communist Act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Round Table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other group, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I studied it for 20 years, meaning back to just after World War II, and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. And listen now to this incredible confession. I have no aversion to it or most of its instruments, but in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. And I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. And that is why he titled his book Tragedy and Hope. This network has brought the world immense tragedy, but that they are the hope of the world. This is an absolutely staggering statement because this conspiracy planned World War II, which started in 1941, but planned it as early as 1920. And that war murdered 53 million people because this network wanted to create the United Nations. And Dr. Quigley has no aversion to that. And notice that if Bill Clinton did not rebuke the views of Dr. Quigley, as he did not, that means that Bill Clinton also has no aversion to the murder of 53 million people to give the people of the world the United Nations. That shows you just how evil this conspiracy is. And this quote comes from page 24 of Tragedy and Hope. The powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim. Nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country, and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled by the central banks of the world. And by the way, just so you know, the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank is America's central bank. And these banks act in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent meetings and conferences. And here on page 954, Dr. Quigley admits that this conspiracy actually controls American communism, if not worldwide communism. It was this group of people who provided much of the framework and influence which the communist sympathizers and fellow travelers took over in the United States in the 1930s. It must be recognized that the power that these energetic left-wingers exercised was never their own power or communist power, but was ultimately the power of the international financial coterie. It now becomes appropriate to introduce you to Cecil Rhodes, one of the many people that Dr. Quigley identified as being one of these conspirators. Quigley says Mr. Rhodes feverishly exploited the diamond and gold fields of South Africa and rose to be the Prime Minister of Cape Colony between 1890 and 1896. In fact, the African nation of Rhodesia was named after Cecil Rhodes. That nation is now called Zimbabwe. In the middle 1890s, Rhodes had an annual personal income of over $5 million, which was spent so freely for his mysterious purposes, and they centered on his desire to bring all the habitable portions of the world under their control. For this purpose, Rhodes left part of his great fortune to found the Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford. So where did Bill Clinton go after graduation from Georgetown in 1968? This is once again page 36 of the U.S. News and World Report article for October the 19th, 1992. And it shows that from 1968 to 1970, Bill Clinton was at Oxford studying as a Rhodes scholar. Dr. Quigley then explained on page 582 what the Rhodes Scholarship Organization did in America. They set up a Council on Foreign Relations in New York. And then on page 950, Quigley taught Mr. Clinton. The American branch of this organization, meaning the Council on Foreign Relations, has played a very significant role in the history of the United States. So in 1988, several years after he returned to America, Bill Clinton joined the Council on Foreign Relations. And then in 1992, the Council on Foreign Relations delivered the election to President Bill Clinton. And the last quote I would like to bring to your attention is this one found on page 73 of Tragedy and Hope. Dr. Quigley wrote, "The business interests expected to control both political parties equally. Indeed, some of them intended to contribute to both and allow an alternation of the two parties in public office." That means that the Democrats would be in office for 8 years, and then the Republicans would be in office for 8 years, pretty much the same as America has been doing since the 1920s. The Republicans held the presidency under Ronald Reagan for 8 years, from 1981 to 89. The Democrats held the presidency under Bill Clinton for 8 years, from 1993 to 2001. And then George Bush was elected to 2 terms, which means he left office in 2009. And then, due to the alternating party practice, America will elect a Democrat for 8 years. And they did. They elected Barack Obama a Democrat. All because there is an international network that controls both parties equally. Now let me continue with Quigley's answer to the question, why do they want to alternate the two parties in power? Dr. Quigley taught Mr. Clinton in order to conceal their own influence, inhibit any exhibition of independence by politicians, and to allow the electorate to believe they were exercising their own free choice. I hope you can see just how important what Dr. Quigley just wrote is. We think that we, the people, are in control of our elections, that we select the best candidate from amongst the candidates who run for the presidency, and that we change things when we put the other party in office after we decide that the previous party has failed us. But Dr. Quigley says that they select the 2 candidates and then we elect one, and they win no matter who is elected. Please notice the contempt this conspiracy has for the people of the United States. We think we are electing our president, but they know that we dummies are too stupid to figure it out and get us to select a candidate from the 2 they selected for us. And they have been getting away with it ever since the 1920s. And to show you that the statement that both parties are controlled by the same people is true, let me show you the evidence that President George Bush, the father, intentionally threw the election of 1992 to Bill Clinton. There is a universal rule in politics whether you are running for the presidency of the United States or for dog catcher of Tucson. And by the way, I ran for the dog catcher in Tucson in 1996. This was one of my street signs. Unfortunately, I didn't win, but I don't think it was my campaign slogan of vote early and often that had anything to do with it. But let me get back to what I was saying. There is a universal rule in national, state, and local politics, and that is never, never, never promise a tax increase. You can talk about increasing benefits or adding new bureaus, but you never, never, never tell the electorate you will increase taxes to pay for it. because if you do, you will most certainly lose the election. The taxpayers will not vote for candidates who promise tax increases. Now, to show you that George Bush knew the rule during his presidency, he coined a very catchy phrase. Read my lips, no new taxes. This was repeated so often by comedians and others that it became known all across the United States, but the intent was to make it well known amongst the American people. So what happened next? George Bush raised taxes in 1990. George Bush lost the election of 1992. George Bush intentionally lost the election of 1992. Because just as Bill Clinton told us, both parties are controlled by the same people. And it was not a coincidence that George Bush was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, just like Bill Clinton. That means that the conspiracy wanted Clinton in office. He had followed the yellow brick road, and a conspiracy made him president of the United States. By the way, there was a precedent for Mr. Bush's rather dramatic action. Walter Mondale, the Democrat candidate for president in 1984, did identically the same thing in his campaign race against Ronald Reagan, the Republican candidate, in the election campaign of that year. On the night of the Democratic National Convention on July the 19th, 1984, when Mr. Mondale accepted the nomination for the presidency from the Democrat Party, Mr. Mondale broke the no taxes rule with these words. Let's tell the truth. My opponent will raise taxes, and so will I. He won't tell you. I just did. And to show you that the cartoonist had a field day with Mr. Mondale's statement, this cartoon appeared in U.S. News and World Report. Mondale is shown on his bandwagon under a banner which reads, I'll raise your taxes. He's shown saying through a megaphone, come on, come all, jump on folks, hey everybody, yoo-hoo, hello, testing. And there's no one around, no one is shown jumping on his bandwagon. And the second cartoon shows Mondale holding up what appears to be a post-election Chicago Daily Tribune newspaper with the headline reading, Mondale defeats Mondale, apparently referring to his Democratic convention speech in which he promised a tax increase. And as could be predicted by anyone who knew the rule, Mondale lost the election of 1984 intentionally. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, Walter Mondale was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Notice that both the Republican and a Democrat presidential candidate was asked to throw his election, and both of them did by breaking the no taxes rule. So this is evidence that both political parties are controlled by the same people. That means that the conspiracy wanted Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton in office. So there you have it. Clinton's conspiracy is real. President Bill Clinton is a member of the vast left-wing conspiracy he told us with his own mouth. Now let me return to the discussion of President Bill Clinton's teacher and mentor, Dr. Carroll Quigley. To Dr. Quigley's credit, he did experience a slight change of heart about his support of this conspiracy. 4 years after his death in 1977, Quigley's new book was published. It was entitled The Anglo-American Establishment. First of all, please notice that the flag of the United States shown on the dust cover of the book is upside down. This is a universal distress sign that a nation is in trouble. So the implication of the publishers is that the United States was in trouble, apparently because of this international network. And this is part of the evidence that Dr. Quigley had some reservations with what he had discovered about the power of this network. The paragraph underneath his picture on the back cover of the book says these are the words of Professor Quigley before he passed away. No country that values its safety should allow what this network accomplished. That a small number of men would be able to wield such power in administration and politics should be given almost complete control over the publication of documents relating to their actions, should be able to exercise such influence over the avenues of information that create public opinion, and should be able to monopolize so completely the writing and the teaching of the history of their own period. Welcome aboard, Dr. Quigley. You are on the right track. However, he went on. It is not easy for an outsider to write the history of a secret group of this kind, but it should be done. For this group is one of the most important historical facts of the 20th century. But agreeing with this group on goals, I cannot agree with them on methods. In this group were persons whose lives have been a disaster to our way of life. Unfortunately, their influence has been strong, and thus ends the story of Dr. Carroll Quigley. However, let me make this observation. If Dr. Quigley was alive today and I could talk to him, I would say this. If only you had said this before this international network you so strongly supported and had no aversion to murdered 53 million people in World War II, they might still be alive today. But I must be fair to Dr. Quigley. At least he figured it out and tried to correct his early support of this international network. He deserves the praise of freedom-loving people all over the world. But his attempt to clear the air poses a real problem for Bill Clinton. He also said that he had no aversion to this conspiracy. And while Dr. Quigley finally objected to its evil methods of wars, depressions, and revolutions, during Clinton's entire 8-year administration, he did not renounce the methods of this network. In fact, he appointed hundreds of their members, fellow members of the Council on Foreign Relations, to positions inside his administration. Please remember that President Clinton's hero, Dr. Quigley, said that these people had been a disaster to our way of life. But Bill Clinton appointed them anyway, even after Dr. Quigley made that statement that they were a disaster to our way of life. And let me not forget to mention the name of one individual who has been a disaster to our way of life, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton's teacher, the man who guided him on the path to the presidency, later called him a disaster to our way of life. You will recall that Dr. Quigley wrote The Anglo-American Establishment in 1981, and Bill Clinton did not become president until 1993, 12 years later. He certainly could have read this book just like he read Dr. Quigley's first book, Tragedy and Hope. And ever since he has been out of office, he has done nothing to expose this conspiracy. Bill Clinton was encouraged to learn about this conspiracy. Bill Clinton went to Georgetown to be taught about this conspiracy. Bill Clinton then went to Oxford to learn more about this conspiracy. Bill Clinton joined the Council on Foreign Relations to become a part of this conspiracy. And Bill Clinton was made President of the United States because he had no aversion to this conspiracy. And then Bill Clinton did nothing to expose it nor stop it in its plans for America. This is the legacy of Bill Clinton's presidency. Men of decent morality will always regret that he did not have the conviction to expose them and their evil deeds. Yes, this conspiracy has truly become Bill Clinton's conspiracy. This will not be an easy speech to deliver because I too believed the lie. And I would like to repeat my request that you become a member of a jury and withhold your verdict about whether I am right or wrong until you hear all of the evidence. If you will do that, I believe the evidence that I will present will convince you that the claims I make will be proven correct. I used to believe that those who founded this nation were men of God, or at least they believed in a supreme being, and that they wrote perhaps the finest documents ever written by the mind of men when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and then the Constitution. But we have been lied to. Because I have found evidence that our founding fathers were part of an ancient conspiracy. And because they were, they set this nation on a course that few in America know anything about. Perhaps the greatest evidence that I am right comes from the pen of Benjamin Franklin, one of this nation's most influential founders. This is Mr. Franklin dressed in regalia, indicating that he was a member of the Masonic Lodge, commonly called the Masons. He signed both the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the Constitution of the United States of America in 1787. Yet, as I hope to prove, he was a major conspirator. He assisted in the creation of the most oppressive document ever written by the mind of man, the Constitution of the United States of America. Now that is not the traditional view assigned to what most historians call the most liberating document ever written by the mind of man. And I am certainly aware of the implications of what I believe about the beginnings of this nation. What you are about to hear is perhaps the most revolutionary work ever written on the founding of this nation and the writing of both the Declaration and the Constitution. Because the founding fathers were conspirators, because the founding fathers were liars, because the founding fathers did not protect man's God-given unalienable rights, they took them all away. As was previously mentioned, perhaps the best example of how they accomplished this was written by Mr. Franklin himself. When he wrote his autobiography, Mr. Franklin came as close to admitting the guilt of this nation's founding fathers as it is possible to do so without directly admitting it. This is what he wrote on page 110 of his book entitled Benjamin Franklin, His Autobiography, published by P.F. Collier & Son as one of the Harvard Classics. Franklin tells us how he and some of his fellow legislators in the government tricked their fellow legislators. He and some of his fellow legislators wanted to purchase some gunpowder, but they knew the Quaker legislators in Pennsylvania would not approve the purchase of such an article of war. So they voted an act for 3,000 pounds for the purchasing of bread, flour, wheat, and other grain. After the legislation was approved, they bought gunpowder with the 3,000 pounds, and some of their fellow legislators objected, claiming that they did not authorize that. But Mr. Franklin told them that gunpowder was indeed another grain, and indeed gunpowder is a grain. They had just invented a way to conceal their trickery by hoping that the legislature would think that the phrase other grain was another ingredient of bread. And then he provided his readers with another example of their trickery and deceit. They wanted to purchase a great gun, presumably a huge cannon. They wrote up legislation to buy a, quote, fire engine, end quote, and the legislators voted for the fire engine. And Franklin bought his great gun. As Franklin pointed out, surely a great gun is a fire engine. Our founding fathers did not lie to us, they simply used words to deceive. I wrote my second book entitled The New World Order in 1990 as an attempt to identify the true motive of the conspiracy that I had uncovered in the writing of my first book. And to start the explanation of what that motive is, I must start by stating there is something coming. This thing coming is not very pleasant. And it is called the New World Order. And lastly, this information that I will be covering today will offend some of you. I am sorry for that, but I must tell the truth as I find it. I am hopeful that those offended by what I say will confirm that I am right by their own research and then take some corrective action. Our founding fathers committed this nation to the New World Order in at least the year 1782. They believed that their mission was a noble one, but they knew they had to conceal that future from the American people. So they used words to deceive, just as Mr. Franklin admitted in his autobiography. They certainly knew that their ultimate desire, the New World Order, would be very unpleasant to the American people if they knew about the system they were going to give them, and that the people would not allow them to change it. And to show you an example that will show you how they deceive us, let me show you a drawing that appeared in a book entitled A Bridge to Light by 33rd degree Mason Rex Hutchins. By the way, the 33rd degree of the Masons is the highest degree attainable, and it appears as if the 33rd degree of Freemasonry runs the Masons worldwide. And this book was published by the Masons themselves, so it is official. This is the first page of this book showing the reader that this book has been published by the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree of the Masonic Lodge. Mr. Hutchins reproduced this drawing showing two men, one on top and the other reversed from it on the bottom, and he called it An Aged Man and His Reflection. The word reflection is defined as a mirror image but upside down. That means that both of these drawings should be the same except one is reversed. So now let's look at this drawing again. Notice that the two drawings are not of the same man. All of the items on the top drawing change in the drawing of the bottom figure. For instance, the man's black shirt changes to white in the bottom drawing, the banner around his neck changes from white to black, and the words are different. So Mr. Hutchins is wrong when he says that it is a drawing of an aged man and his reflection, because many of the things in the top drawing change in the bottom drawing. If the drawing were that of a man and his reflection, the bottom figure would be a mirror image of the drawing of the top. This is that drawing on the top, and notice that the aged man has been drawn wearing what appears to be a crown with a cross on top. I believe that the crown represents government and the cross represents Christianity, the teaching on how to form that government. So this drawing represents the merger of government and religion, meaning government based upon the morality taught by Christianity, symbolized by the cross. Now let's look at, quote, the man's reflection, end quote. Now this doesn't look like a man to me, it looks like a demon. And notice that the demon is still wearing a crown, but the cross has been removed. That means that the man represents a government without the teachings of Christianity. That means that the Masons are advocating a new world order, because the new world order is a new civilization for the people of the world without the moral teachings of God. So this drawing is intended to show you the future, a government run by a demon without the teachings of Christianity. Now let me show you the involvement of the Masons in the creation of the United States. This is Henry C. Clausen, one of the past sovereign grand commanders of the Masons, meaning he was the national president for their fraternity. He was the author of a book entitled Masons Who Have Shaped Our Nation, published in 1976 by the Supreme Council of the 33rd Degree in Washington, D.C. He wrote that 23 of the 39 signers of the Constitution were members of the Lodge, and of course 23 of the 39 signers of the Constitution would be a clear majority. I have seen various estimates about the number of the signers of the Declaration of Independence who were Masons, one of which held that as many as 52 of the 56 signers were members. The Masons officially say, however, that only 9 of the signers have been cited as being members of the Masons. The reason that no one knows for certain is that many Masonic records were destroyed in the Revolutionary War of 1776. But 23 of the 39 signers were members of the Masons, which means that they were clearly the majority of the body that wrote the Constitution. So whatever they wanted, they had the authority to obtain. This is Manly P. Hall, another 33rd degree Mason, who is perhaps the greatest Masonic writer of all time. He wrote a book that was published in 1944 entitled The Secret Destiny of America, in which he discussed this nation's future. He wrote this: there exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. It is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization, by the way, notice not just the United States but worldwide civilization has a secret destiny. Secret, I say, because this high purpose is not realized by the many. He also discussed the order of the quest in another of his books entitled The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Not only were many of the founders of the United States Masons, but they received aid from a secret body in Europe. Mr. Hall does not say who the secret body in Europe was, but it appears to have been the Illuminati formed in 1776 in Bavaria, now part of Germany, about the same time that the founders of this nation were creating the United States. He continued, which helped them to establish this country for a particular purpose known only to the initiated few. So America had a particular purpose, a secret destiny, known only to the Illuminati, the Masons, and the Order of the Quest. Mr. Hall further told us who at least some of the group known as the Order of the, or at least one of the group known as the Order of the Quest was. He wrote this on page 134 of his book entitled The Secret Destiny of America. Benjamin Franklin spoke for the Order of the Quest, and most of the men who worked with him were also members. So the Order of the Quest, the Illuminati, and the Masons created this nation with a secret destiny not to be known to the average American. And then Mr. Hall tells his readers where the evidence of this conspiracy can be found. These are the two sides of the Great Seal of the United States, and both have been reprinted on the back of every American dollar bill. Nearly all governments' seals have only one side. If the American seal has two, one side has no direct purpose. So it must have a hidden purpose, and Mr. Hall tells us that it does on page 181 of his book entitled The Secret Destiny of America, and in additional writings of his. There is only one possible origin for these symbols, and that is the secret societies which came to this country 150 years before the American Revolution. The Revolutionary War started in 1776, so 150 years prior to that year would be 1626, about the time the Pilgrims and the Puritans came to America. So Mr. Hall is saying that at about the same time the first settlers were coming to America, another group came who intended to set this nation up with a secret purpose in mind. He continued, the Great Seal was directly inspired by the Order of the Quest, and it set forth the purpose for this nation. And he added these comments in another part of the book. If the design on the eagle side is stamped with the signature of the Order of the Quest, the design on the pyramid side is even more definitely related to the old mysteries. What he was saying was that these symbols on our dollar bill are related to the ancient mystery worship of what he just called the ancient mystery religion. This is the reverse side of the Great Seal again. Notice that the eye is above the pyramid and not on it. In other words, the work of creating the New World Order is not done as yet. The Great Seal was created in 1782 and will not be completed until the eye finally seats itself upon the top of the pyramid. And there will be no world order, there will be no New World Order until the eye symbolically lands on top of the pyramid. And 46 years of research indicated that that date of that event was known to our founding fathers as January the 1st, 2000 AD. And as I said at the beginning, I cannot explain why it did not happen, as these conspirators had planned it for over 6,000 years. I believe that that means that those who designed the Great Seal in 1782 knew what they were doing. They were placing this nation on a track to some secret destiny, and they knew they had over 200 years to create the changes needed to bring it about. They knew what that the American people would never approve of their secret destiny, and that was why they kept it secret and concealed it in symbols in the Great Seal of the United States. These men had an evil purpose. They made their plans in secret, and there were two or more involved. Those are the requirements of the definition of a conspiracy.